am honored to introduce to you today K-State's College of Veterinary Medicine 2025 Alumni Fellow, Dr. Ron Marler. Ron, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Ron, you've been at K-State not only for your bachelor's, but also getting your doctorate of veterinary medicine. And what brought you to K-State?
It was veterinary medicine. I had an experience with Dr. Luke Benaway, who was a practitioner in Topeka, Kansas, where I was living at the time. And he hired me for one summer in 1966. And I got enthralled with veterinary medicine. And obviously Kansas State was the school in the state of Kansas for veterinary medicine. You may ask why Kansas State, because there were a lot of veterinary schools at the time. I think most of us who grew up in the state of Kansas kind of felt like the world ended at the eastern border of the state of Kansas. And so we stayed at home. Kansas State was obviously a good choice.
So with your time working in that veterinary clinic, what really drawed you into veterinary medicine?
I don't know that it was so much something that I did at the clinic as just the excitement about veterinary medicine and certainly what I read. So not per se the clinic, because it was primarily working in the kennels and taking care of the animals. But he did allow me to help out in surgery. So that was kind of exciting to do that.
What was your time like here at Kansas State University going to school?
You know, that's a good question. And I was in a fraternity, Beta Theta Pi, Beta House, here on campus, and spent 4 years, obviously, in there. So that was exciting. And then early on in my career, I was an EMT for Riley County Emergency Services in the late 60s and 70s. And I was telling the lecturer that we had before, I still drive around Manhattan and see sites of calls I went on to 50 years ago and can remember them very vividly. But those were kind of my initial memories of Kansas State.
And you were a part of the class of 1973 from K-State's College of Veterinary Medicine. However, after you graduated, you joined the U.S. Army Veterinary Corps. And what was that like?
Well, for those of us who are of that age, there were very few people who joined. There were lots of people who were asked to join, and I was one of them. I had a very low draft number, and we were allowed to come on as reserve officers and allowed to finish our education. But once our education was finished, then you were commissioned immediately into the military. And so I was commissioned as a captain in the military and was stationed at Fort Riley.
What did you do during your time?
At Fort Riley?
Yeah.
Well, I jokingly say that I protected the state of Kansas from foreign adversaries. And the good news is we weren't invaded. And I also usually put in there that was without me ever being issued a weapon. But in seriousness, I had a herd of buffalo who were probably the commanding general's pets. We had one sentry dog, and we had in charge of the commissary. So that was my assignment for roughly 2 years.
And after that, you came back to K-State and did some more schooling. And
Yes.
What did you choose to get a PhD in?
I got my PhD in veterinary pathology. I got interested in pathology by working with a pathologist at Irwin Army Hospital at Fort Riley. He would allow me to come over and look at pathology slides, histopathology slides. And that's how my interest in pathology started. And then I took a look around, and again, I guess being reticent to move outside the state of Kansas, I thought, well, Kansas State has a program in veterinary pathology. I'll go take a look there. And Jim Cook was gracious enough to take me on as a graduate student.
And you finished that in 1978. And where'd you go afterwards?
I went to a company called Mead Johnson, which was a part of Bristol Myers Squibb. And I was hired as a bench pathologist to look at histopathology.
What is a bench pathologist?
A bench pathologist sits behind a microscope 8 hours out of the day and reads microscope slides.
And you continued working in pharmaceuticals. Where'd you go after Mead Johnson?
I decided that I wanted to do something more than just to look at slides. So I went with, at the time, it was called Dow Pharmaceuticals in Indianapolis. And I got more involved in overall study design of toxicology studies. I subsequently decided that I wanted to get more involved in drug development. So I did the work necessary to become more experienced in drug development, eventually becoming vice president of global toxicology for one of the predecessors to Sanofi Adventis.
And when you say drug development, what do you mean by that? What steps were you playing a part in?
Primarily drug safety. So that's been my whole career is drug safety. There's a very fairly rigid set of requirements that you have to do before you can put drugs into human beings, even for first clinical trials and then for further development. So my job was to do the animal toxicology studies associated with that, interpret the data.
Did you do some teaching while you were there?
I had an academic position at Purdue. I was an adjunct professor at Purdue, and I had an adjunct position at Butler University.
And K-State pulled you back and you became the dean of K-State's College of Veterinary Medicine in 1994. And why'd you come back to Kansas?
I think a better question is, why did I leave? But we'll get to that in a minute. I think in a sense it was a huge honor. I mean, as a general rule, deans are not taken out of industry. To become an academic dean, you generally work up through an academic administration. And George Kennedy, who was a good friend of mine, called me and asked me if I'd be interested. And I thought, I'd like to interview just because I come from a different background, and I think I can come with a different perspective on academia. And so I thought, well, I'll apply, but I was under no illusion that they were going to pick me because you have to consider yourself as kind of the dark horse candidate. Lo and behold, they offered the job to me, and then I had to make a decision, and I did take it. It was a great 3.5 years, but as I was talking to the group today, academic administrators are primarily consensus builders. People from industry are not consensus builders. You're paid to be visionary, you're paid to make decisions, and they better be the right decisions. But that other people like or dislike the decision is not high on your priority list. That's not true in academic management. You have to build consensus to try to get things through. It was apparent to me that my management style in particular was probably not suited to be dean, because I wanted to get some things done very quickly, and it was probably better for the faculty in general to have a dean that did more consensus building.
And what was it like coming back to K-State, no longer as a student, but now a dean?
I would tell you that it was great. I enjoyed being with the students tremendously. I enjoyed 98% of the faculty. I enjoyed all of our alumni. Okay? I mean, it was truly an honor, but I think getting things done in academia that need to be done, and the majority of the people need to be done, is difficult to do coming from a business background.
So went back into industry, and what did you do when you did that?
So I took over successive corporate management positions at Covance Laboratories, and ultimately became vice president of global toxicology for Covance. I then came out to Arizona. We were looking at putting in a facility to handle our East Coast clients in Arizona. And one of the meetings we had was with management at Mayo Clinic. And I was approached by their management with a request of would I consider joining Mayo Clinic. And I had to think hard about it, but I took the job at Mayo Clinic. And that's kind of how my career started at Mayo Clinic.
Did you ever think you'd end up where you did with your degree in veterinary medicine?
Never. Again, in my lecture earlier today, I mentioned the fact that if you put my resume on one side of the ledger and my classmates' names on the other side, you would have never matched my name with the resume. So it was a complete disconnect.
Would you do it all again?
I think in essence, because one of my assignments was teaching trauma medicine at Mayo Clinic as part of a team, I've always felt that I was a frustrated ER physician, and especially a trauma physician. And it's not something I will ever do, but if I had to do it again, I might seriously give that some thought.
Interesting. And so after you retired, you kind of did some consulting. And what did that entail?
Well, it basically was similar to what I was doing in industry, except I was being paid directly. So it was consulting with companies across the globe in their development programs. And that's how I started my consulting business.
So as you've obviously been very integrated in veterinary medicine, how have you seen it change over the years?
I think I was talking with Dr. Hodis just today. I think the biggest thing I've seen in veterinary medicine is there's no longer a reliance on cost. When I came up as a student, cost was everything. It was, as a client, you always had to be cognizant of what the client was willing to pay. I notice today in most clinics, cost is never discussed. That's never the first thing that's discussed. It's more like medical treatment. If you went to Mayo Clinic, you would never walk in and ask what it's going to cost to have surgery done. You know, that's kind of an afterthought. So I think that's the biggest thing I've seen change.
For people who are interested in veterinary medicine, what do you recommend to them?
Well, the biggest thing I think most veterinary students in general, but students in general, if I had my way, they'd all take business courses. Regardless of what your background is and what you think you want to do, if you want to be successful in life, it's either your personal finances or more globally, the finances of the group that you're working in. But I think if I were to recommend people, you ought to have at bare minimum a course in basic finance.
And as you mentioned, the career path you took, not something you expected of yourself. So for people who are maybe just graduating, what do you want to tell them?
Good luck. No, I would say you just have to follow the opportunities. I would have never sit there and said these are the opportunities. When I was at Mayo, I was approached by Tony Sun from Aisling Capital to become the CEO and on the board of directors of a company. And I had to think hard about that. Would I leave Mayo and do it? And as it turned out, I negotiated an arrangement with Mayo Clinic where I was an executive on loan, and Mayo Clinic got paid the cash and stock remuneration for my activity with the company. Subsequently, I helped sell the company to another friend of mine who happened to be the CEO of a laboratory in Beijing, China. And so I sold the company, helped sell the company to him, and sat on the board of directors for that company. And then later on in my career at Mayo, I was approached by Tony Frank, who is the chancellor for the Colorado University system, and he asked me if I would sit on the Colorado State Ventures board. And I sat on that board for several years. And so it's, as I lectured today, it's not necessarily what you know, it's who you know that counts.
Ron, what are you up to now?
I have a consulting business with my cat. My cat moves around, slides around the microscope. And so it's, I do as much as I want to do. I could do more, I could do less, so I just do what I want to do. But I have a consulting business.
Any final words of wisdom for our listeners?
I don't think so. Another just, follow what you think is right for your career and your family, and things will work out.
That was K-State's College of Veterinary Medicine 2025 Alumni Fellow, Ron Marler.